new information before talking to the committee. But Schiff believes that if Democrats don't participate, this investigation into Russia will not happen. But Anderson, as you see, a sharp disagreement between the two over a central question about what the actual evidence that they're looking at is, and raising a question about whether or not the committee can ultimately produce a bipartisan report. Anderson.
All right, Manu Raja, thanks very much. Shortly after House Intelligence Chairman Nunes said what he said yesterday, the president said he felt somewhat vindicated with respect to his wiretap claim, even though Congressman Nunes made a point of saying he had seen no evidence that President Trump was directly or personally wiretapped. In its latest issue, Is Truth Dead?, Time magazine examines the president's embrace of demonstrably untrue claims. The article is called, Can President Trump Handle the Truth? Time Washington Bureau Chief Michael Scherer wrote it after interviewing President Trump yesterday. He joins us now. Michael, thanks so much for being with us. I got to say, it was a fascinating interview and article. I want to get into some of the details of what the president told you, but first on the timing of this, when did you reach out to the White House about the story, and what did you tell them?
I reached out on Monday. I told them I was working on a story about this issue of truth and falsehood in politics and Trump. I said on Monday, this is before the Comey hearing, that I expected to be pegged on what Comey's testimony said, and then had another conversation on Tuesday with the White House. I think what led Trump to want to do this interview is that he felt that he wasn't getting credit for things he had said in the past that had been disputed, that had later turned out to be true. I had said to them, I also wanted to explore this idea, which I talk about in the story, that sometimes falsehood has worked to his benefit, that sometimes he's able to seed the national conversation with claims like, the president was possibly born in Africa, or Mexico is sending rapists across the border, or Muslims celebrated on September 11th, that sort of work like viruses in our news media, force everybody else in politics to respond, take over the news cycle, and then deliver his message of the day, and that he had been rather savvy about doing this. And those were the 2 points I told him about, and he called on Wednesday afternoon.
You pushed the president over many of his statements that have turned out to be wrong or flat out untrue. It's fascinating, though, just to read it, because he is, as he often is in interviews, particularly we saw during the campaign, completely unfazed, and often pinning it on articles or cable TV shows that he's watched, saying he was just repeating what he read or heard, or that people were talking about, or people say, or he heard it, or he read it. Despite this being a week where the FBI director said there was nothing to back up his claims of wiretapping by President Obama, he clearly feels somewhat vindicated and kept referencing to what Nunes had said at the White House.
Yeah, so we think of truth and falsehood as a binary, right? You're either right or you're wrong. That's how journalism works. He sees this more as a negotiation. And at every point you push him, he'll maybe fall back a little bit and make another claim, or change the topic, or direct things to a different place. Say I was only saying wiretapping in quotes. Say I didn't say that. It was a newspaper article I was reading. And I was just saying what the newspaper said, even if it was the National Enquirer and it was basically a bogus story. And I think this says a lot about how he has always seen this issue. He came up in real estate. He came up talking about truthful hyperbole. He's always manipulated reality, or at least perceptions of reality, and he's done it with significant success. And this also brought the other point. I kept asking him about credibility and the credibility of the office of the president, and if he worried that over time, if he kept getting called out by his FBI director or other people for saying things that weren't true, if the credibility of the office would be hurt. And his answer to that repeatedly was, did you see the size of my crowd in Kentucky a couple nights ago? And do you know that I won the election? I mean, he's not willing to give any ground on that, because he thinks his approach to this has been affirmed by the American people and is still being affirmed by at least his supporters.
Well, it's also interesting in the interview, and again, this is something we've seen before, but just to see it out in print the way he was talking to you, he will claim credit for something because he made a statement that was untrue about something that occurred, like something that didn't actually occur, but then it maybe, days later occurred or months later occurred, and then he will say that he was right, because even though he was talking about something that hadn't occurred when he said it, something later occurred that he then could claim credit for saying it.
Right. And that gets to what I was saying before, that it's not black or white, it's not true or false. He's not judging himself by the literal words he said. The example he was giving here was about what he said last month at a Florida rally about something happening last night in Sweden, referencing some sort of immigration issue in the country. There was no immigration issue the previous night, but a couple nights later, there was a disturbance in a suburb with a lot of immigrants. And he said that vindicated what he had said before. And I said, well, but you were talking in the past tense on Saturday. You weren't talking about a future event. And he just didn't see that as relevant. That for him, and he said this several times, he has great instinct. He has a great feel for what's happening. If he said months earlier in a tweet that Anthony Weiner's sexting was going to get Hillary Clinton in trouble, and then it comes up in a letter from Comey a couple weeks before the vacation, he thinks he deserves credit. And by its extension, he thinks if he says the president wiretapped me, even if the FBI director is saying that is not true, there's no evidence to that, he thinks we should basically suspend our disbelief and wait, because he has a record that proves he's been right in the past.
And I mean, one of the headlines from today, just from what was the line he said to you about he must be doing something right?
Yeah, this is one of the times I was asking him about the credibility of the office. I tried one more time, and he basically said, well, I'm president and you're not.
Right. I must be doing something right. I'm president and you're not.
Right. Yeah, that's right. And he was just repeating basically the same idea he had said earlier when he was talking about his crowds in Kentucky. If you want to say that I am misleading people, then judge me by my success, is basically what he's saying.
Right. Michael Scherer, just fascinating. It was really, I just encourage people to read the interview. It's just fascinating. Thank you so much. Back now with the panel. It is interesting, I mean, in that article, because it is kind of a perception of the presidency which is so unlike past presidents. I mean, you talk about the credibility of the office. It doesn't seem, and I'm trying to say this, I don't want to sound in any way snarky, but it doesn't seem as if he has the same perception of the office, perhaps, that other presidents have had.
Look, I think the most telling, it may be the most telling quote that we've heard from Donald Trump when he said, when he justified all of it by saying, I'm president and you're not. And I think it really reflects his governing principle, which is, if you win, that justifies what you've done. And you can do anything in service of that, and the result will justify. I also found it interesting that, his argument seems to be, I may not be truthful, but I am prescient. So even if what I said didn't happen, it's going to happen, which is really unusual.
So can I get the Powerball number?
Right. But he's always been this way, and he's a 70-year-old man, and he's not going to change. And I remember one story about him in Atlantic City when he was opening the Taj, and the slot machines were shut down by the Gaming Commission because they weren't ready to be open for whatever reason. And then he went on Larry King, and Larry King said to him, well, what about those slot machines, And he said, they just blew up because so many people were using them. And they blew up from overuse, which, of course, was not true. And he's always done it.
But he knows exactly what he's doing. I mean, I think he's an evil marketing genius, right? I mean, he became famous because he was on a television show.
You're using the term evil lovingly.
I'm using it not lovingly.
Okay,
but he became famous from a television show. He knows what he's doing. He's creating confusion. He's muddying the waters. What he hasn't confronted, and we don't know yet because we're only 60 days in, is what that means when you're the leader of the free world and you're the commander-in-chief, and how the rubber may meet the road there, because foreign leaders, the military, others may start to take what you're saying literally, and there are real consequences. But he's just confronted.
My friend Andy Cohen, who does all those Real Housewives franchises, he tweeted out today that this is this is the president's Real Housewife tagline: I must be doing something right because I'm president. And
Coming soon.
Speaking of Time Magazine, I did a column on them just the other week. And one of the things that we never talk about here, and I mentioned this a little bit in a piece for CNN, is media narrative. And the piece I did on Time compared directly Time Magazine's cover of then President-elect Obama in 2008, smiling picture of the president, and it says, Person of the Year. 8 years later, Donald Trump comes along. There's his picture. He looks grim. It says, President of a divided United States of America. Now, all I'm suggesting to you is that when you are going to constantly say that one person is the greatest thing since sliced bread, and your media analysis always is, this guy's terrible, then that plays a role in all of this and how this is presented.
How does that, forgive me, I don't want to debate media bias or perceived media bias. But okay, even if I accept your point, at least 14 things he said in the article were demonstrably false.
Okay, John.
What does that have to do with Barack Obama versus Donald Trump?
Sure, a lot. Because when I went back and took a look, there were plenty of stories out there from conservative outlets about President Obama not telling the truth on all manner of things, not just the famous, if you like your doctor, you can keep it, but all kinds of things. But that was not the narrative.
But when that turned out not to be true, he was hammered for it. That's why they lost those elections.